My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 58 years old, and for over 3 decades, I served in the United States Army. I was a commanding officer in special operations trained in high-stakes extraction strategy and silence. My record sealed. My medals stored in a box no one has ever opened. My name erased from the very family I once fought to protect. Last Sunday, I stood behind a fence at the annual Carter Family Military Homecoming, a ceremony held every year honoring the men and women of our bloodline who had worn the uniform. My father was seated in the front row. My brother wore his captain's dress blues. My niece, an ensign in the Navy, gave a speech about legacy. They laughed, posed for photographs, called themselves the lineage of proud service. But when I asked to attend just to sit quietly in the back, they said no. I wasn't invited. I wasn't welcome. They said I failed, that I had no place at a ceremony celebrating honor. They mocked me for what happened in Syria, a decision I made 15 years ago, one they didn't understand and never wanted to. You abandoned your command, my father once told me. You disgraced the Carter name. They never asked what really happened. They never cared. So I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I stood behind the chain-link fence dressed in civilian clothes, while they read out the names of our family's so-called heroes. Mine wasn't on the list. But 5 minutes into the ceremony, something happened. The ground began to tremble, not from music, from engines. 20 Humvees turned the corner in the tight formation. They moved like a coordinated wall of thunder. 200 soldiers, dust rising behind them like a curtain. They didn't slow down. They didn't hesitate. They surrounded the field in silence. Then a black SUV pulled up. The door opened, and out stepped a 4-star general. He walked past the startled guests, past my father, who had now risen from his seat, and past the podium where my brother stood frozen mid-sentence. The general stopped in front of me outside the fence. He looked me in the eye, and then in front of everyone he snapped a salute. "Welcome back, General Evelyn Carter." He said it loud, steady, no room for confusion. And suddenly it was my name that echoed through the air. The crowd fell into complete silence. Cameras were still. No one moved. My father didn't speak. He couldn't. The man who once said I was a failure stood speechless. You want to know what I did to deserve that salute? Why 200 soldiers rolled in like a military parade with no warning? Why the same government that stripped my title 15 years ago chose to honor me now, then keep listening? Because if you only read the headlines, you'll think I abandoned a mission. But if you listen to the story, you'll understand why I broke the chain of command to save 43 children, and why I stayed silent for over a decade, until the day my name was denied a seat in my own family. I didn't show up that day for recognition. I showed up to remind them that erasing my name doesn't erase the truth. And this time, I wasn't the only one who remembered it. I didn't turn my head when the first engine roared. I didn't need to. I knew the sound. The low, muscular rumble of tactical diesel synchronized movement, not civilian parade. That wasn't some National Guard performance. The noise grew louder. Chairs began to rattle. Children on the front lawn covered their ears. Guests looked toward the street, confused, squinting in the sun. Then someone said it, "Are those Humvees?" They came around the corner in perfect formation, 20 of them. Dust kicking up behind American flags mounted on both sides. No music, no sirens, just silence and steel. 200 soldiers stepping out in rows of 10, not a word spoken. The entire homecoming crowd froze. I remained behind the chain-link fence, my hands still folded, my face unreadable. But inside, my heartbeat slowed. My breath grew measured. I had requested precisely 45 minutes of declassification. No more. No less, and that clock had just started ticking. The last vehicle stopped at the center. The doors opened. And out stepped General Malcolm Rhodes, commander of the U.S. Army Central Command. 4 stars on each shoulder, 35 years of service. A man I had not seen since the day he told me to take the fall for Syria. He didn't glance at the podium. He didn't acknowledge my father. He walked directly to the fence, stopped 3 feet in front of me, and saluted. Sharp, clean, formal. "Welcome back, General Evelyn Carter," he said. Gasps broke through the crowd. I could hear my niece whisper, "Did he say, General?" My brother's lips parted, but no sound came out. And my father who once told me, "You will never be saluted again." just stood there, eyes wide, spine stiff, as the top-ranking officer in attendance saluted the daughter he had erased. Then behind Rhodes, every soldier, every single one raised their hands in sync and mirrored the salute. A wave of silent respect. A corridor of honor. I didn't return the salute, not yet. Instead, I stepped forward through the open gate someone had quietly unlocked. I stood before them, back straight, shoulders steady. I nodded, not out of pride, but out of something deeper. A knowing, a truth reclaimed. And in that moment, the weight of 15 years shifted. Not because the world believed me now, but because I no longer needed them to. If you want to understand why this happened, why a name once stained with shame suddenly stood in full uniform again, you'll have to go back with me, back to Syria, back to the orders I was given, and the ones I refused to follow, because the story they told wasn't the truth, and the truth they buried, it's time to unearth it. In my family, every wall told a story. The living room at my father's house was a gallery of generations, black and white portraits of great uncles in World War II, cousins in Desert Camo during Desert Storm, my brother in his academy uniform smiling like a Kennedy. Even my grandfather standing next to General Patton in a photo no one was allowed to touch had his frame secured above the fireplace. The Carters wore uniforms like a second skin. Service wasn't a choice, it was an expectation. You didn't ask if you asked which branch. By the time I turned 16, my path was already assumed. And at one point, my picture was up there too. A framed photo taken the day I received my first commission. My hair tucked neatly under my cap, my jaw tight with purpose. It hung just to the right of my brother's, slightly lower, because as my father once joked, rank goes left to right, oldest to youngest. For years I stood proudly on that wall, not because I craved attention, but because it felt like home, like proof I belonged. Every time I came home on leave, someone would say, "There she is, the girl who outran the boys." And I'd smile and let them believe that was the whole story. But after Syria, after 2010, my photo came down. They didn't say anything when it happened. No announcement, no argument. Just, one day, it was gone. Replaced with a watercolor painting of a bald eagle. Subtle, symbolic, final. My father never addressed it directly, but my brother did. Over dinner, months later, after my name had been quietly removed from a guest list to a family function. "You know why," he said, cutting his steak. "You disobeyed an order. You pulled your unit out before command gave the green light. That's not bravery, Eve. That's desertion." He said it like he was reading from a manual. Like he wasn't talking to the sister who once taught him how to shoot, who gave up her own chance at promotion so he could attend the school he wanted. In my family, that was the version of the story that stuck. Evelyn Carter disobeyed. Evelyn Carter embarrassed the army. Evelyn Carter lost her commission. Evelyn Carter fled. It didn't matter that I never asked for a public trial, that I'd been ordered to sign a confidentiality agreement, that everything I did that day, I did to save lives. What mattered was that the name Carter now had a footnote beside it, and no one wanted to read it out loud. At my father's retirement dinner, I wasn't mentioned in his speech, not even as my daughter who served. It was as if I had never worn the uniform at all. And the worst part, I let them. Because explaining the truth would have meant breaking a silence I'd sworn to keep. Because defending myself would have required revealing things that were never supposed to be public. Because I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe they'd see me again. But instead, they filled the empty frame with silence. And over time, silence hardened into belief. You see, people don't need evidence to erase you. They just need a story that feels close enough to the truth, and a wall with one less photo. The last time I was invited to a Carter family dinner, the table was set for 14. I remember because my niece had used name cards, little folded pieces of cardstock with gold lettering. Everyone had a seat with their title, Captain Lieutenant Dr. Chaplin. Mine just said Evelyn, no rank, no acknowledgement, just my name written small, tucked between a water glass and a salad fork. They seated me at the far end next to the coat rack, and the spare chair used only when the dog wandered in. My brother sat at the head basking in stories about a recent promotion. My father leaned in close, laughing harder than usual. My photo was already off the wall by then. No one mentioned it. Throughout the meal, my father never looked at me, not once. Not when I passed him the butter, not when I stood to refill my water. He addressed everyone else, asked my cousin about his deployment, congratulated my niece on her naval scholarship, thanked my brother for carrying the Carter name forward. He skipped me like I was a skipped track on a scratched CD. Halfway through dinner, my cousin raised a toast to honor those who've served with distinction. Glasses clinked, smiles passed. I raised mine too, but no one noticed. They were too busy looking at my brother, who was already drafting a response that sounded pre-rehearsed. I stayed silent. I could feel the distance like a second skin, not just between our seats, but in every glance that avoided mine. Every conversation I was left out of, every sentence that used, "we but never you." After dessert, I helped clear the plates. Old habit. My mother used to say, "You can always tell who was raised with discipline by who stays to clean." But she wasn't there anymore, and that night no one offered to help. I rinsed the last dish, dried my hands on a towel, and turned to my brother. "I think I'm gonna head out." He nodded. No hug, no walk to the door, just a distracted thanks for coming. I passed by my father on the way out. He didn't speak, but he did shift in his seat, turning slightly away, like even my silhouette was an offense. No one called me after that night. No texts, no updates, no invitations. When my cousin got married the following spring, I found out through a tagged photo. I wasn't invited. When my brother had his first child, I heard through a colleague at the VA. By then I knew I was no longer a daughter, a sister, or an aunt, just a ghost that wore the same last name. Years later, I would learn by accident that my name had been left out of my father's will. Not moved, not disputed. Simply erased. As if I'd never existed at all. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. Because that dinner wasn't just a meal. It was a message. A declaration of exile, delivered with napkins and silence. I walked out that night into the cold keys in hand. And realized something. You don't need a prison to feel like you've been locked out of your own life. You just need a table where everyone looks through you. Like you were never seated there to begin with. I once held power in my hands. Not the kind you wield with noise and medals, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes with classified orders, midnight phone calls, and decisions that change the fate of people whose names you'll never know. I led teams no one talks about. Operations that didn't exist. Missions that if successful would be forgotten, and if failed would be disavowed. I commanded not from a podium but from silence. And in silence I carried out my duty. I learned early that the best soldiers don't leave footprints. They leave shadows, and I was damn good at my job. My teams called me Ghost Mother. It started as a joke because I showed up in places I wasn't supposed to be, solved problems no one else could, and vanished before anyone could say thank you. I didn't need the thanks. What I needed was impact, and I had it, until I didn't. There was one time, just one, when someone tried to give me credit. It was after a humanitarian intervention in West Africa. We had extracted a group of medics under siege with 0 casualties under heavy fire against direct odds. The unit I led acted with precision, restraint, and moral clarity. It wasn't glamorous, but it saved lives. My commanding officer submitted my name for the Distinguished Service Cross. I didn't even know until the paperwork had already moved up the chain. Then it stalled. 2 weeks later, the award was reconsidered. 3 weeks after that, I got the call. A voice I didn't recognize, someone too young, too rehearsed, told me the nomination had been withdrawn. No reason, no apology. Just a flat statement, "Ma'am, the recommendation has been superseded due to recent evaluations." I knew what they meant. They meant Syria. The whispers were already following me. The unofficial briefings. The misreported version of what happened outside Aleppo. The one where I disobeyed a direct order and compromised a multinational alliance. That version made its way through the ranks faster than facts ever could. No one called to ask my side. No one wanted nuance. And I wasn't allowed to explain. The mission was sealed. The consequences were mine to carry. From that point on, my name was marked. Not blacklisted, just overlooked. Passed by. Avoided. New officers coming up would glance at me in the hallway and smile awkwardly, unsure if they should salute. I became the kind of figure people referenced in whispers. She was great until that thing in Syria. Command didn't fire me. They didn't have to. They reassigned me again and again. Less visibility, less input. Eventually, I stepped back, voluntarily, because there's only so many times you can be invisible before you start believing you're not there at all. But here's the part they didn't understand. I didn't serve for ceremony. I served because people were in danger, and I had the skill to help them. Whether or not they put a medal on my chest didn't change what I did with my hands. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. To watch others be celebrated for doing less, while I disappeared into classified footnotes and closed-door briefings. I disappeared so well, in fact, that when I walked away, no one even noticed. At least not until the day I showed up behind that fence. Not until the engines rolled in. Not until someone asked why would a 4-star general salute her Syria 2010. No one was coming. That was the first truth I understood that day. We had boots on the ground outside a village 30 miles west of Aleppo, Operation Daggerlight. It was supposed to be a routine sweep, confirm the intel, locate weapons storage, secure the perimeter, and exfil by nightfall. But within 30 minutes of arrival, everything changed. The layout didn't match satellite imagery. The building that was marked as a suspected weapons cache had school desks inside, broken chalkboards, drawings still pinned to the walls. That wasn't a hideout. It was a school converted into something far darker. We found cages in the basement, 43 children, dirty, drugged, used as human shields. Our radios were jammed. Drones had been pulled for reallocation, and the backup team delayed by decision, not logistics. Later, I'd learn why. The village was under the covert protection of a foreign paramilitary group, with deep ties to one of our allies. The State Department had quietly greenlit non-intervention in exchange for intelligence access to regional oil routes, meaning we weren't supposed to be there, meaning if things went south we'd be denied. So when I requested emergency evac and was told stand by for further instructions, I knew that was code. I knew no help was coming. We had maybe 20 minutes before the compound would be overrun. I could either wait for an order that wouldn't come, or act. I chose to act. I ordered my unit to split 2 teams covering the exits, 1 extracting the children. No formation, no clearance, just precision and speed. We moved through dust and screams, through booby-trapped doors and gunfire that came from rooftops disguised as homes. 3 of my soldiers were injured. None died. And every child made it out. We left blood and broken rifles behind. We also left behind any illusion that command would back us up. By the time we reached the safe zone, I had already sent the after-action report. I didn't lie. I didn't spin. I said exactly what we found, exactly what we did, and exactly why I didn't wait. I expected a reprimand. What I got was a silence louder than any courtroom. The report was sealed, the mission reclassified. When I asked about my team's commendation, I was told, "Ma'am, we've decided not to pursue further documentation at this time." That was bureaucratic code for you just embarrassed someone with a lot more power than you. A week later, I received a formal letter conduct review initiated for failure to follow chain of command. The children we rescued relocated under humanitarian aliases. Their identities sealed. Their stories never told. The world kept turning. And I kept quiet. Because I knew if I fought it, those kids would become headlines. Their faces splashed across news screens. Their trauma weaponized to defend a soldier who no longer had a flag behind her name. So I stayed silent. I absorbed the narrative. Let the record show insubordination. Let my family believe I ran. Let the medals go to officers who never stepped foot on that dirt. Because this wasn't about glory. It was about 43 children who got to grow up. And if that meant I became a villain in my own country, so be it. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's 43 lives that get a second chance because one person disobeyed a command that was never meant to protect the innocent in the first place. My family didn't know the truth, but the harder part, they didn't want to. After Syria, the silence from command was brutal, but the silence from home, that one cut deeper. I remember calling my father the day I received the conduct review notice. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I just wanted him to hear it from me, not from someone else. He picked up on the second ring. I told him calmly, factually, that I had been officially cited for disobeying orders and that I had accepted the consequences. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "I taught you to follow the chain of command, not rewrite it. And that was the end of the conversation. No questions, no curiosity, no, are you all right, or what really happened. Just one final sentence before he hung up: you've brought dishonor to this family. 2 weeks later, I learned my name had been removed from our family's military lineage plaque, the one that sat in the hallway just outside my father's study. He had a local engraver come in and replace it with a brass plate that read, "Reserved for future service." It was as if I'd died, and they were saving the space for someone more worthy. Not long after my younger brother Daniel was promoted to major. He was already climbing fast, but when I vacated my field assignment, the door opened for him to step in. And he did. With ease. He never spoke to me about it. Never asked if I was okay stepping down. Never questioned how he benefited from my fall. Maybe he told himself I deserved it. Or maybe he just didn't care. At family gatherings, what few I tried to attend, no one brought up my name. If I entered the room, the energy shifted. My aunts would smile politely, then retreat into other conversations. My cousins would nod from across the space, never stepping closer. My presence became a polite inconvenience. One year during the annual Memorial Day cookout, my father gave a toast to the brave men and women who have made us proud. He listed names: Daniel Uncle Royce, even a distant cousin from the Coast Guard who once delivered mail in Guam. He skipped mine entirely. That wasn't an accident. I realized then that my punishment wasn't just from the army. It was from blood, from legacy, from the people who were supposed to know me best. It would have been easier if they had asked. If even one person had said, "Tell me what happened." Not the news version, not the official one. Yours? But they never did. Because my story was inconvenient. Because it made them question the rules they lived by. Because it meant admitting that sometimes the system they worshipped gets it wrong. It was cleaner, simpler, easier to believe that I had failed, to write me off as the cautionary tale, to use my name as a warning. Don't be like Evelyn. Don't think you know better than the command. They said I was arrogant, that I'd let my ego cost lives, even though none were lost, even though lives were saved. But facts don't matter when people are protecting their comfort. They'd rather protect a lie than confront a truth that doesn't fit in a speech. So I stopped calling, stopped writing, stopped trying to explain. I became the story they told behind closed doors, the ghost that haunted the photo albums, the one whose name they lowered their voice to say. And all the while I kept quiet. Not because I agreed, but because I loved them more than they had the capacity to love me back. And sometimes love means letting people hate you if it helps them sleep easier at night. 2 months before the Carter family military homecoming, I received a text from my cousin Leah. It was short, informal, almost careless. "Hey, just a heads up, big homecoming ceremony this fall. Dad wants it to be the biggest one yet. Thought you'd want to know." There was no link, no invite, no follow-up. Still, I checked the official site. Sure enough, there, it was Carter Military Legacy Reunion, honoring 3 generations of service. My brother's name was in the banner. My father's in the introduction. Even Leah's husband, who served a 2-year non-combat stint in Germany, had a designated time slot to speak. I scrolled through the itinerary. Guest speakers, medal presentations, video tributes, a segment titled "The Heroes Among Us." My name wasn't there, not under honorees, not in the schedule, not even in the footnotes. There was, however, a short disclaimer at the bottom of the page. Due to the formal nature of this event, we kindly ask that guests refrain from inviting individuals whose service has been subject to disciplinary action. That wasn't subtle. That was aimed at me. It stung, but not for the reason you might think. I didn't need a seat at the front. I didn't need a speech or a medal. But to be erased again, this time in public in front of children who might grow up thinking I was never part of the story. That I couldn't let stand. Not because I wanted recognition, because I owed something. To 43 children who never got to say what happened. To the soldiers who followed my orders trusting I knew what I was doing. To myself. So I submitted a formal request to the Department of Defense. Not to challenge the event. Not to sue. Just to unseal a limited portion of my file. 45 minutes of visibility. Enough time for the truth to breathe. The process wasn't easy. I had to go through 4 layers of clearance. I had to sign new restrictions agreements that would make the file disappear again the moment the clock ran out. but eventually the request was approved. 45 minutes, limited scope, on-site only, no press, no replication. I told no one. Not my brother, not my father, not even Leah, who probably assumed I wouldn't show up. In the days leading up to the event, I stayed quiet. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't dig out my uniform. I didn't practice how I'd explain myself if someone asked, "Why are you here?" Because I wasn't coming to explain. I was coming to witness, to look them in the eyes one by one and show them that I was still here. Unbroken, unashamed, and uninvited. I bought a train ticket instead of flying, wore civilian clothes instead of ceremony whites, arrived the night before and stayed at a motel off the highway. I watched the event space from across the street, watched the flags go up, watched the chairs get arranged, watched the family arrive in waves, smiling, greeting, proud. No one noticed me, and I liked it that way. That morning, as I sat behind a low fence watching the speeches begin, I felt strangely calm. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about reclaiming my name, even if it was only for 45 minutes, even if no one ever said it out loud. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up not to be seen, but to remind yourself that erasure is not the same as absence. I had been written out, but I was still here, and the truth, it never left with me. I arrived an hour early, not out of eagerness but calculation. I wanted to avoid the crowds, the eyes, the rehearsed greetings. I parked my car 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance on foot, taking side streets and alley turns like old habits I couldn't unlearn. The event was held at Veterans Green, a small city park repurposed every year for this ceremony. Rows of folding chairs were set up on the lawn. Flags from every branch fluttered in the breeze. A rented stage stood at the front, flanked by 2 large speakers and a podium wrapped in red, white, blue bunting. I wore jeans, a clean navy button-up. No ribbons, no pins, no military seals. Nothing that might suggest I was someone to pay attention to. I approached the main entry path, gravel freshly raked. A young man in uniform stood by the gate, clipboard and hand scanning names. "Name, ma'am," he asked, polite but detached. "Evelyn Carter," I said softly. He looked down the list. His pen hovered, then moved back. He flipped a page, then another. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't see your name here." "I'm not on the list," I replied. "I'm not asking for a seat up front, just in the back. I'll stay out of the way." He hesitated, looked over his shoulder toward a group of organizers clustered near the stage. "I've been instructed not to allow entry to individuals not formally registered." "I'm really sorry," I nodded. No anger, no argument. Just a quiet thank you as I stepped aside. I found a spot at the edge of the park behind a low fence that separated the seating area from the sidewalk. It wasn't a great view, but I wasn't there to watch. I was there to witness. A woman pushing a stroller past me, gave me a warm smile, and moved on. She had no idea who I was. And for the first time in a long time, I found comfort in anonymity. I sat on the short stone ledge that bordered the grass. Legs crossed, hands in my lap. Back straight, old habits again. From where I sat, I could see the whole stage. My brother stood near the podium rehearsing his notes. My father was already in the front row. Posture, perfect jaw, set of veteran's pride draped across his entire body. I watched as they greeted cousins, shook hands with city councilmen, posed for photos with other decorated guests. People I used to know, people who used to know me. Not one of them looked in my direction, and I didn't expect them to. I wasn't there to interrupt. I wasn't there to correct. I was there because this used to be my story too. A volunteer handed out printed programs. A child skipped past me with a flag in each hand. A small marching band tuned their instruments under a white tent off to the side. Then the ceremony began. An invocation, a few words from the mayor, a reading of the Carter family roll of honor. I recognized every name and felt the absence of mine like a silent echo between syllables. They listed my brother twice, once for his active duty, once for his community service. They even mentioned my cousin's husband who never deployed, but not me, not once. I sat still, breathing slow, counting each pause between applause. Every cheer a reminder that I wasn't part of the applause anymore. And yet I didn't feel small. I didn't feel erased, because I knew something they didn't. The clock was ticking, and 45 minutes had just begun. As my brother took the stage, clearing his throat into the microphone, I stared at the hem of the flag behind him. The stars were crisp, the red so bold it looked wet. It reminded me of a different kind of red, a different kind of silence. Aleppo 2010. My boots hit the dirt at Euro 300. We moved in low breath controlled, no flashlights, no radio chatter. Our orders were precise sweep. The North Corridor confirmed presence of enemy weapons cache, avoid civilian confrontation. But what we found wasn't ammunition. It was children, caged, drugged, some unconscious, used as shields by militants who knew how to exploit American rules of engagement. And suddenly, every protocol I'd ever followed unraveled at my feet. Intel said the compound was hot priority target. Command said hold position, await further clearance. But I knew the clearance wasn't coming, not in time, not without consequence, because there were other interests in play, political ones. And children weren't on the agenda. I had a decision to make: obey and wait, or disobey and move. I chose to move. We broke formation and split into extraction teams. I led the charge through the east entry, took fire within 60 seconds. 2 men went down, one shoulder hit, one leg shattered. We dragged them out while covering fire echoed behind us like angry thunder. We breached the basement and found 43 children barefoot, trembling, barely responsive. I radioed in cargo located. Request evac immediately. Silence. I repeated, this is Echo Leader. I have 43 civilian minors. Request urgent evac. More silence. Then static. Then finally, this operation is not authorized. Do not proceed. I stared at the radio like it had grown teeth. Do not proceed. We had seconds before the enemy regrouped. Seconds before that building became a tomb. I didn't ask again. I gave the order, evac now. We're leaving. No matter what they say. We carried those children out wrapped in spare blankets and body armor. We loaded them into trucks, covered them in our own jackets. We didn't look back. By the time we hit the safe zone, 1 child had a seizure. 2 more were vomiting from whatever they'd been sedated with. 1, the smallest, just 5 years old, clung to my leg like I was the only thing left in the world worth holding on to. We saved them, all of them. But Command didn't see it that way. Their message was clear. You exposed a political compromise. You risked diplomatic fallout. You acted on your own. And so I became a problem to manage. The mission was sealed. My record scrubbed. The official story read: compromised intelligence, civilian evac incomplete. Not a single line about the lives we saved. No mention of the children, not even a footnote. They wanted it erased. And I let them. Because fighting back would have meant dragging those kids into a spotlight they didn't ask for. It would have meant telling the world who failed them and who tried to cover it up. So I took the reprimand, signed the NDA, and walked off the battlefield with no applause, no explanation. But not this time. As my brother's voice echoed across the green, full of pride, full of performance, I didn't move. I didn't flinch. This time, I stayed. Behind the fence, in plain view. Because for the first time in over a decade, I wasn't the one being extracted. I was the one holding position, holding my ground, and waiting. Not for rescue, but for reckoning. It began with a tremor. Subtle at first, like distant thunder. The kind of sound that makes birds lift off trees before anyone notices why. People turned their heads, murmurs rising like the temperature. Then the sound grew louder. The vibration moved beneath the soles of my feet. Engines, heavy, familiar. Someone near the stage shaded their eyes. What the hell is that? Another whispered. I already knew. 20 Humvees rounded the corner in tight formation, headlights, off dust swirling behind them like fog stirred by memory. Their approach was methodical, no blaring horns, no flags waving, just raw presence. You could feel the silence between each rotation of the tires. They weren't part of the program. No one had invited them, but they came anyway. The ceremony halted mid-sentence. My brother paused at the podium, eyebrows furrowed. My father stood slowly scanning the formation as if trying to calculate whether this was a protest, a mistake, or something worse. The convoy rolled to a halt. Soldiers stepped out in coordinated movements, 200 of them. Boots hit the ground in rhythm, forming a corridor straight through the middle of the green. Then the final vehicle opened. And out stepped General Malcolm Rhodes. 4 stars glinting under the midday sun. dress uniform impeccable, face unreadable, the highest-ranking officer in attendance, and the one man I hadn't seen since the day he signed the order that sealed my record. He didn't acknowledge the crowd, didn't shake hands, didn't wave. He walked past the seated guests, the city officials, the Carter family, and the podium, all of them silent now, unsure what to make of this unfolding rupture in tradition. He walked toward the side of the fence where I still sat, hands folded back straight. And he stopped. Right in front of me, the world held its breath. Then with perfect posture and full clarity, he raised his right hand and saluted. "Welcome back, General Evelyn Carter." My name, full and formal, rang out across the green, like a bell struck after years of silence. Gasps cut through the crowd, like wind through brittle leaves. Someone dropped a program. Someone else said, "Did he say General?" I stood. Not quickly, not triumphantly, just with purpose. General Rhodes dropped his salute. "I've requested your full honors be reinstated," he said, voice calm but resolute. "Temporarily declassified. Effective now." He turned to the crowd, lifting his voice to carry. For those unaware, this woman served 33 years in the United States Army. She led classified operations in 5 countries. She saved lives in places we are not allowed to name. She held rank when others held fear, and when the system failed, she held the line. He turned back to me. "We forgot to say thank you, until now." Then, as if by signal, all 200 soldiers behind him raised their hands and saluted in unison. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, but inside I felt something shift. Not vindication, not vengeance, just gravity, realigning. Behind me I heard voices, soft at first, then rising. She was one of us. How did they not include her, General Carter? I thought she was. They didn't finish the sentence, because they knew what they had thought, and they knew how wrong it sounded now. My brother was still frozen at the microphone. My father hadn't sat down. Rhodes looked back once more. "Would you like to address them?" I shook my head. "No need. I'm already heard." He nodded, stepped aside, and with one motion, his soldiers formed ranks again, this time facing outward, as if protecting something sacred. "Me no. The truth." He walked slowly, not hesitantly, but deliberately, like each step had weight. Like he had rehearsed this in his head 1,000 times, and now standing before hundreds of strangers, he wanted every second to matter. He looked about 25, maybe 26. Trimmed hair, gray suit. His shoes were dusty, like he'd walked across the park instead of taking the road. In his hand he held a folded letter. I recognized him before anyone else did. Not by name, I never knew his name, but by the shape of his face, by the small scar above his left eyebrow, by the way he held his shoulders like he'd once carried the weight of the world at 5 years old. He was one of the children, from Syria, from that night, from the basement. A volunteer whispered something to the MC. The microphone was handed over. No one objected. No one knew who he was. But something about the silence told everyone to listen. He unfolded the letter, cleared his throat, and began. "My name is Dr. Asim Khalil. I was born in Aleppo. When I was 5 years old, I was taken from my village and used as a human shield by men who did not care whether I lived or died." The crowd was dead silent. He continued. "On February 16, 2010, an American unit breached a compound outside Aleppo. The soldiers didn't know they would find children. They were ordered to wait. They were told it was dangerous. But one woman, one commander chose to move anyway. That woman was General Evelyn Carter. I saw heads turn, mouths open, eyes shift toward me. My memories of that night are fragments," he said. "Pain, light, the smell of diesel. A woman kneeling beside me, wrapping a jacket around my shoulders. Her voice, calm, reassuring. I never forgot her voice." He paused, then looked directly at me. "I'm alive today because she disobeyed." A few gasps broke through. Someone near the front wiped a tear from their cheek. "I became a doctor," he went on. "Today I work at a children's hospital in New York City. I've helped save lives because someone once saved mine. And for years I didn't know her name. No one would tell me, no one would talk about the mission. I only learned the truth recently, by accident, through a leaked document that never should have existed." He turned back to the microphone. His voice trembled, but not with fear. With something deeper. Pride, grief, Gratitude. She didn't ask for a thank you. She didn't ask to be remembered. But I remember. We remember. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. My younger sister, one of the 43 children rescued that night, wrote this before she passed away last year from leukemia. She wanted to say something if she ever found out who had saved her. He unfolded a note. Read it softly to the lady with the strong arms. Thank you for being brave when the world wasn't. Thank you for choosing us even when you were told not to. I don't remember your face, but I remember feeling safe. That was enough. My hands didn't move, my body didn't sway, but inside my breath shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. Behind me, someone sobbed. Near the front row, I saw my father's knuckles turn white on the edge of his chair, and beside him, my brother's face was pale. Asim looked out at the audience one last time. History tried to forget her, but we didn't. And we won't. He stepped down. No applause, not because he hadn't earned it, but because the moment had stolen sound itself. He walked straight toward me, and when he reached me, he stopped, held out his hand and said, I've waited my whole life to say this thank you, General Carter. I shook his hand, firm, still. Not a word between us, because sometimes when truth is finally spoken out loud, there's nothing left to add. For 15 years, my father never looked me in the eye. Not after Syria, not after the family dinners I wasn't invited to, not after the whispers turned into silence and silence into absence. Even when we shared the same room once at a cousin's funeral, he kept his focus elsewhere. It was like I no longer existed inside his line of sight. But after Asim's speech, something cracked. He didn't stand right away. He didn't rush forward. He didn't drop his chin in shame. That would have been too easy and too unlike him. Instead, he sat perfectly still. His fingers laced tight in his lap. His shoulders locked in that same parade rest he had taught us all as kids. But his jaw trembled once briefly. And that was the first movement I'd seen from him in years that wasn't rehearsed. My brother leaned toward him, whispered something I couldn't hear. My father didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the spot where Asim had stood, where truth had poured out like water over old dry stone. Then without warning he rose. Not urgently, not as a reaction, more like a shift in gravity. I didn't flinch. I didn't assume he was coming toward me. In fact, part of me thought he might just leave. Walk away like he always had. But then as the crowd began to murmur and shuffle and exhale again, he did something I hadn't seen him do since I was a little girl. He turned toward me. Our eyes met. 15 years collapsed into that one loaded moment. I saw it. The pride he had buried. The doubt he had never voiced. The pain he had swallowed whole because it was easier to blame me than to question the system he spent his life defending. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't extend his hand. But he nodded. Just once. Not a grand gesture. Not public acknowledgement, but a recognition. A salute not from rank to rank, but from father to daughter. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't apology, but it was something real. And real was enough. He held the gaze for only a second longer, then turned back toward his seat. He didn't sit. He simply stood behind the chair, hands gripping the top rail, like he needed to hold on to something that wasn't collapsing. I could feel every breath in the space around us shift. My brother glanced at me next, unsure, his face somewhere between confusion and regret. But I didn't meet his eyes. Not yet. That moment belonged to my father and me. To everything that had gone unsaid. To everything we had both lost. And everything we might never get back. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. Not as General Carter. Not as the disgrace, the outcast, the ghost. Just Evelyn. The girl he once taught to tie her boots with precision. The daughter he once believed could lead armies. The woman who had lived long enough to prove that he wasn't wrong, just unwilling to wait long enough to know it. And maybe that was all I ever needed. Not applause. Not a medal. Just one glance back. To remind me I had never been invisible, only inconvenient. The ceremony ended, but the noise didn't. Within hours, clips of the Humvees rolling in went viral. Someone had filmed General Rhodes saluting me from 3 angles. Another caught Asim's speech, in full shaky but clear. By the next morning, my name was trending for the first time in 15 years. Not as a disgrace, not as a ghost, but as a question mark. Some headlines called it Redemption Forgotten General Returns to the Spotlight. She disobeyed, but she saved lives. Who was right? Others weren't so generous. Hero or liability? Did General Carter endanger a diplomatic alliance? Comment sections burned like wildfire. She disobeyed orders, plain and simple. That's not heroism, that's insubordination. If she hadn't acted, 43 kids would be dead. What would you have done? Imagine if every soldier took it upon themselves to rewrite commands. We'd have chaos. You know what else we'd have? Less death by bureaucracy. Even among veterans, the debate was split. Some praised my decision, called it battlefield clarity. Others said I broke the code, and once that's broken, everything else unravels. Podcasts invited ethicists, generals, trauma survivors. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted the last word, except me. I didn't post, I didn't respond. I didn't write a memoir, because none of this was new to me. They were just having the argument I had already lived through alone. But I watched, quietly. Not to defend myself, but to understand how the world makes sense of gray. It didn't surprise me that people chose sides. What surprised me was how many people paused. How many said I don't know what I would have done. That pause meant something, because for 15 years I had been the villain in a story no one wanted to examine. Now for the first time, people weren't just looking at what I did, they were asking why. And whether they agreed or not. That shift from judgment to inquiry felt like a kind of justice. Imperfect. Messy, but real. I went home the next morning. No press conference, no interviews, no roundtable discussions with military analysts dissecting my every decision. I didn't return calls from journalists or respond to email requests. I didn't sign a book deal, and I didn't let anyone film a documentary. I didn't need a platform, I just wanted peace. The farm was waiting, fences still needed mending. The garden had gone wild with late summer weeds. My boots sank into the familiar dirt like they were finally allowed to rest. I took off the jacket with the service patch, folded it neatly, placed it back in the trunk with the box of medals I still hadn't unpacked. Then I closed the lid and slid it under my bed. I wasn't hiding, I just wasn't performing. There's a difference. For years my silence was forced, mandated by clearance buried beneath secrecy and shame. But this time it was mine to choose. And I chose it. I no longer needed to correct the record. No longer needed anyone's apology or applause. The truth had come into the light not because I dragged it there, but because someone who lived because of it spoke. That was enough. Let the world debate. Let the forums spin in circles. Let the people who only knew the headline wonder if I deserved redemption. Because redemption wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for space, to breathe, to plant, to sleep without the hum of judgment in my ears. I woke up with the sun and fed the goats. I fixed a broken fence post with a hammer so old it used to belong to my grandfather. I brewed coffee in the same chipped mug I used the morning after I resigned. Life didn't change, but I had. Somewhere between the convoy and the speech between the boy I'd saved and the father who finally looked at me, something inside me settled. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was. Maybe I'll never be fully understood. Maybe people will always argue about whether what I did was right. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay, because belief is not a prerequisite for truth. And justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a woman on her porch, watching the sky change, finally at peace with herself. It came on a Tuesday. The envelope was unmarked, no return address, no stamp beyond the usual. Just plain handwriting on the front to Evelyn. Inside a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, no signature, but the words were clear. If you'll allow it, I'd like to come by. Not to say sorry, just to listen. That was all. No demands, no defense. No, but you have to understand. Just that. And even though his name wasn't written anywhere on the page, I knew who sent it. The way the Y curved at the end. The way the paper smelled faintly like old tobacco and pine. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of me for almost an hour. Coffee gone cold. Sun slipping through the window. My thumb brushing the edge of the paper over and over. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat. For years I had rehearsed what I would say to my father if he ever came to find me. I'd imagined confrontation arguments, maybe even screaming. But that single sentence undid all of that. Not because it fixed anything, but because it wasn't trying to. He didn't write to reclaim me, he wrote to witness me. And for a man like my father, whose love was discipline, whose approval was silence, that was an earthquake. Still, I didn't write back. Not because I was punishing him. Not because I didn't want him to come. But because I needed the silence to last just a little longer. To breathe in what it felt like to be heard before being spoken to. That afternoon, I went out to the porch with the letter still in hand. The breeze was light. The goats were quiet. The world didn't know what was unfolding in my chest, but I did. And maybe so did he. I didn't know if he'd come. And I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew this. That letter didn't ask for forgiveness. It asked for a seat. Sometimes that's the most honest thing a man can offer, especially one who taught me to fight with rules, then punished me when I chose people over protocol. He would come, or he wouldn't. Either way, I had already stood up from that table, the one where I was once seated last, and built one of my own. And if he arrived, I'd pour him a cup of coffee. Same chipped mug, same quiet morning. No apologies needed. Just room to speak. And maybe room to listen. That morning, I woke up before the sun. The air was still like the earth hadn't decided to breathe yet. I moved through the kitchen on instinct, same worn floorboards underfoot, same faint hum from the fridge. My hands reached for the kettle without thinking. 2 mugs this time. One for me, one for maybe. I didn't look at the road. Didn't expect an engine or boots on gravel, or the old gray truck I still remembered from years back. I just boiled the water. As it steamed and hissed, I cleaned the porch, just a little, dusted off the old rocker, and pulled out the second chair from the corner where I usually kept it folded. I didn't even know why I'd saved it all these years, but it was there waiting just like me. I set it beside mine, not across, not facing me like a confrontation, but next to me, as equals, as witnesses to the same sky. It was a small thing, really, a second chair. But in our family, seats had always meant something. At our dinner table, your place defined your standing. Father at the head, mother to his right. Then the children in order of favor or performance. When I was younger, I used to inch closer to the top, hoping one day to earn the seat beside him. Then came 2010. And just like that, I was gone. My chair empty, my name quiet. This morning, as the coffee brewed, I sat down in my chair on the porch and placed the second mug on the armrest of the empty seat. I didn't think about what I'd say if he came. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't rehearse forgiveness. I didn't relive the anger. I just waited. The wind picked up gently. Birds started chattering in the trees. A goat sneezed somewhere behind the barn. Life continued. I watched the steam curl from the untouched mug. It was beautiful in its stillness, not a symbol, not a statement. Just a cup of coffee for someone I once called father. I wasn't sure he'd come. But setting out the chair, making space, that was for me. To remind myself I could make room. Without expectation, without bitterness, without needing to rewrite what had happened. Just room. For someone who once didn't make room for me. And if he didn't show up, if that seat remained empty forever, that would be okay too. Because the act of placing it there was already a kind of healing. A quiet declaration that I no longer lived in the shadow of absence, that I could invite presence even if it never arrived, that I could leave the door unlocked, the kettle warm, the silence gentle, that I could live without hate, and maybe that was all the victory I needed. I've never visited the wall, not the one carved in marble or lit by spotlights, not the one tourists lean against for photographs. I don't need to. Because I've seen another kind of wall, one not made of stone or bronze. It's in the eyes of people I once pulled from rubble. It's in the handshake of a man who limped toward me at a hospital years after the rescue, holding his son's hand, whispering, "He's named after you." It's in the wedding invitation that came by mail last spring from a young nurse I once carried out of a collapsed school in Syria. She married a firefighter. They said I could sit in the front row. I didn't go, but I kept the card. It's in the photo I have taped to the fridge, a group of 10 kids now grown standing outside a medical clinic in Queens. One's a pediatrician. 2 became teachers, one's with the FDNY. Every single one of them came from a place people once called hopeless. They lived. And that's the wall I visit. Not every name gets etched in medals or speeches. Some live in lives that go on, in the second chances they were given, in the futures they created. If you asked me now, would I do it again? Would I break protocol, risk rank, swallow the silence, lose the honor? Yes. 1,000 times, yes. Because between medals and lives, I choose lives. Between silence and the scream of a trapped child, I choose to disobey. Between fading into history or becoming a memory in someone's survival, I choose to be the reason someone gets to grow up, love, forgive, and maybe save someone else. So no, I don't need my name on their wall. I just need it not to be erased. That's enough. Now I live on a quiet farm. The porch is still. The goats are loud. Sometimes the mail brings letters. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and think I hear distant rotors like ghosts coming home. But most days I drink my coffee on the porch. I read, I breathe, and I remember. Not just the faces I saved, but the ones I didn't, the ones I'll never forget. And if you're hearing my story now, wherever you are, I hope you carry one thing with you. You don't have to be recognized to matter. You don't have to be remembered to have made a difference. You just have to show up. Even when they leave you out. Even when your name is scratched out. Even when no one claps. Sometimes the quietest acts echo the loudest across time. And sometimes, the miracle isn't the person who arrives with glory. It's the one who stayed when no one was watching, before we say goodbye. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.